On today's show, it is part 2 with myself and Andrew Kelly diving into the top of the draft board with regard to Alex Sarr, Donovan Clingan, Zaccharie Risacher, and all of that is coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1737 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on the middle of the week here in mid-June as the Atlanta Hawks get closer and closer to the NBA draft. And today's podcast with myself and Andrew Kelly, actually part 2 of 2. So if you missed anything from part 1, I encourage you to listen to that podcast. It should be available in this same podcast feed right now. More team building stuff on that one, free agency, trades, roster construction, etc. Part 2 is going to be heavily draft focused. We should also encourage you at the top of the podcast, make the Locked On Hawks podcast your first listen each and every day. Check us out across the board in the podcast space. That includes Apple and Spotify, as well as YouTube, Overcast, etc. And again, this is part 2 of 2. Myself and Andrew Kelly talking all things at the top of the NBA draft board. And here we go with part 2. This is actually part of team building too, beyond just the players. With the pick in this class that is thought of as being not exactly top heavy, let's just say. There are, I should be fair and say there are people that like the top of this class more than others, but no one that I talk to around the league is like in love with the top of this class. That's probably fair to say. Knowing that and knowing where the Hawks are and knowing what their roster is and they're trying to win now to some extent, like, how are you evaluating these players? I've been enjoying your like treatises that you've been tweeting out, these 7,000 character tweets about the draft. But team building wise, philosophy wise, before we actually get into the players, which we're about to do, how are you approaching this if you're the Hawks? Like just the process of evaluating this pick, knowing where they are right now.
Well, appreciate you and others sticking through the treatises I've been writing on there. That's been fun to draw up. This year has been kind of interesting just because even though there's not like a consensus at the top, there's still a few guys that I think are more likely than not to be the pick. So I've kind of been focusing on them more than anybody else. But yeah, it's a tough year to pick at the top. Like I think that everybody knows that at this point. You know, I know that some have kind of decided that there is like a clear-cut guy. I don't think there is. Like nobody that I've talked to, people who do this for a living, people who work for teams, have told me that this is just a tough draft to pick. At the top, I mean, I think there are still some compelling options. I mean, there always are, even in like a down draft. But I really just kind of center around 3 guys that I think make sense all to varying levels and just fit along with like intel and mocks that and these 3 guys are generally Risacher, the French wing, Donovan Clingan, UConn, and Alex Sarr, who played for Perth and the NBL. These are kind of the top 3 guys, at least for me, that I would consider. I mean, really, I like Reed Shepard a lot. We won't spend much time on him just because I don't see a way the Hawks take him, but I am a big fan of his game. I just want to mention that. But for me, you know, it really just kind of depends on like what your goals are, your comfort level with these guys, and what additional moves you might make. There's moves that you could make that can make Risacher appealing. You know, if you're going to trade DeAndre Hunter, like say you dump him on the Pistons just to get off his salary, you might be looking for a wing that can step in that's, you know, somewhat ready to play. Risacher has a pretty mature game. He's somebody that you could look at there. If you see yourself taking more time to kind of reassemble this team around Trey to try to unlock the maximum playoff upside, I think Sarr is someone who can make a lot of sense. I mean, he moves incredibly well at 7'1", one of the fastest bigs I've ever watched. Super reactive defender, really fun to watch. He's somebody that makes a lot of sense. And then finally, my preferred option here, as long as medicals check out, like I think that's a very important disclaimer, is Donovan Clingan from UConn. I just think that we can't really say that any of these guys are locked in as starters, but if you had to pick one, I think Clingan's the guy you would pick to have upside to start for you right away. Just the tools that he brings to the table, I think, are really compelling when you have a team like headed by Trae Young. You know, when you're always going to struggle a bit for perimeter defense, having a rim protector who can raise your floor on defense, even if you don't have the best personnel around him, is a really important thing. And I think that Clingan just has a great projection on that end. I mean, we're talking about a guy that has a 9'7" standing reach. Most times that you see that, it's on like weird prospects, like a Taco Fall, someone who's not really an NBA player, but just has crazy measurements. And the only other guy that you really see with that is like Rudy Gobert. And I don't think that's a crazy comparison for him. I mean, I know that Rudy Gobert gets like a lot of hate, but I mean, this is a 4-time defensive player of the year who's always on good teams. His teams are always in the playoffs. Like that kind of player is a good target, especially in a draft where there's not a lot of certainty. So I think that's somebody that kind of comes to mind as like a comparison for Clingan, but just the offensive game as well. Like he's a very good screen setter. I think that could be important. Capella, we've seen like the value he can have as a screen setter for Trey. That's something you want to have in a Trey Young offense. If you acquire like a Brandon Ingram, like another scorer, that's something you would like to have. He's a good passer. I mean, he improved his assist to turnover ratio from like around 0.5 to 2 over the past year. Has some really nice passes over the top of the defense. You can run some cool actions with him and Jalen Johnson if you can get some cuts, things like that going for him in the high post. I think he could feed him. There's just a whole lot to like in his game. So I kind of gravitate towards him right now at number 1, but that all kind of depends on medicals.
Yeah, you mentioned medical, and like I don't know if there's anything bad in there at all, but he had an injury this year, early in the year, cost him some time. He has some questions. I'm not going to say concerns, just questions about like whether he can play a lot of minutes, because he didn't play a lot of minutes as a freshman, which made sense because he was the backup. But this year, even like he was kind of capped around 28, 29. He played 30 a couple times in the tournament, but a lot of guys are playing, mid high 30s in college games pretty regularly, and he's huge. I mean, that's a good thing. But guys, once you get to a certain size, there's always a little bit of a question about injury stuff because some guys can carry it, some guys can't. We'll see. But I agree with you on that. Your overall point about there not being clear number 1, I've said a million times that I agree with you on that, and I think that right now it's gotten it's to be expected. It's gotten to that point in the cycle where Hawks fans have kind of just dug into their various corners. I think for the most, I should say for the most part, there is a large Alex Sarr or bust contingent, which I understand. He's a guy who's really, really talented. People that are in or out on Clingan. Risacher is kind of somewhere in the middle, I think. I mean, even there's people that still like want Ron Holland or want Reed Shepherd or whatever. And that's part of the deal here. But I generally think that it's fairly open, and you can make a case for any of these guys and more. Like I'm just to raise my hand, I'm a little bit lower on Risacher, I think, than some are. But I'll be the first to note, like, there's a lot of value potentially in a 6'9" forward who can shoot the ball and defend. Like, it's just as a pretty interesting archetype, especially as you mentioned, if they were to move on from DeAndre or whatever happens there. You mentioned the Rudy Gobert comparisons for the defensive Clingan. Put the Rudy, I agree with you, the weird Rudy disdain to the side. He's an awesome player. On offense, you mentioned the passing. I agree with you. What is the worry case for Clingan on offense? Like, if you make the pick, I think it's going to basically swing on whether his defense is as good as you think it's going to be or not. But on offense, like, what does it look like for you, like top level or not top level for him on offense? Because it does matter, and he's not like necessarily seen as like this huge lob finisher despite how big he is. Like, what do you make of that whole thing? Especially, let's assume for a second that they're going to build around Trey long term. I think that's part of the appeal of taking Clingan. And my personal opinion would be to pair a guy with Trey that makes a lot of sense with Trey. But what do you think of his offense?
I think if you have to point to a glaring issue in his game, there's not really many, but free throw percentage, that's something that you want to look at. Like, he was below 60% there. So he's not quite to like, hack-a-shack levels, but not too far from that.
There's also the thought, by the way, that he's like going to be a long-term shooter. And I don't think you can,
I don't think you can project that. He did shoot threes in high school and in workouts. Like, if you watch like his Draft Express interview, he singles out that's something that's him. He's been working on it. He shot it pretty well at the combine. Like, it doesn't look bad. I don't think you can project it though, like to your point, but I do think that's something that he sees himself as working on. But free throw percentage, that's something that he really needs to improve. I think he's a good roll man. He's not a great roll man. Like, Clint Capella, like, he gets like a lot of hate for like understandable reasons sometimes because his hands are just, falling off, but he's still a very good roll man. He's a very huge target when he's in the air. And Clingan just doesn't get off the ground quite as fast. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. I think he'll be a good roll man, but not like an elite, like Rudy Gobert has like been an elite roll man, but Clingan also has some ability to score that's not a dunk. Like, that's like another thing that's like a positive for him is that he has pretty good touch, like, within 6 feet, 8 feet of the basket. So you have some options there if you can't get all the way to the rim to dunk it. I think his post game, he had really good numbers on that this year, but He doesn't play with a ton of physicality. Like he seems to have like more of an upright kind of center of gravity. Despite weighing a lot, you can see that he has a lot of potential to add muscle mass. Like he's still pretty skinny despite being massive. So I think that's something that over the next 2 years of his rookie contract, I think you'll see the training staff try to figure out what is his ideal playing weight. How much muscle should we seek to put on him and those things like that. But he needs to play with a little bit more physicality, I think, in the post. That's something that can make him go from somebody that can punish a mismatch to actually being, a genuine threat there. So I think improving in the post is something to look at. Getting a better conditioning that can help with just fatigue and a lot of different areas on offense, like shooting, I think is something that you can look at for improvement for him. But like I said, the really only glaring issue is just free throw percentage. But I do think that's something like his touch is pretty good. So I do think that's something he can improve in time.
Today's show is sponsored by the folks at BetterHelp. We all carry around things that are creating stress, whether it's big or small. We keep things bottled up. It can start to affect us in a negative fashion. Therapy is a safe space to get things off our chest and also figure out how to work through whatever happens to us and how much we're wearing you down in that moment. Therapy is helpful for everyone. And you can also learn positive coping skills, how to set better boundaries in therapy, and they also empower you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for people who have gone through major trauma. I know I have my own stresses when it comes to work and the future and more, and we can all benefit from getting things off our chest in our lives. If you're thinking about starting therapy, do so right now with the folks at BetterHelp. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule at BetterHelp. And it really is a big factor if you're like sort of short on time, like I often am. Having it be flexible to your schedule is really, really helpful. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire and they'll get matched with a licensed therapist. You can also switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Get it off your chest right now with BetterHelp. And the place to go is betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. Get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. One more time, the place to go is that's BetterHelp, betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. What do you make of I've seen a lot of discussion about Clingan, and I have said, and I think others have echoed this too, he's definitely the highest floor of these three for me. Like I have a hard time, barring a medical thing or whatever. I have a hard time seeing him not being a pretty good NBA player. I think the defense is it would shock me if he's a bad defender. Like I think he's gonna be really good defensively as even kind of a baseline. But there is a gap between like good defender and Rudy Gobert. Like I don't mean to make it as simple as that sounds, but you know what I mean? Like what happens if he's not Rudy Gobert and he's more like, I've used Ivica Zubac as a comparison. It's I think is like an underrated and really good starting center in the NBA, but isn't like someone that anybody's going to get excited about. And number one overall, Walker Kessler's another one where it's like, he's a good defender. No question about that. But like, and also he's another white guy, which I'm sure he'll get compared to Walker Kessler quite a bit. What is the case for Clingan if he's not like a game record defensively and he's just good?
Yeah, I mean that's a good counter argument. I'm
just asking. I don't even know.
My thing is like, I really don't have a great answer to that, just because I'm projecting him to be a good defender. Like I just don't really see much that. I think one thing that just really separates him is just how great his tools are. I mean, he's 7'3" in shoes. Yeah. I believe his wingspan was like around 7'7". I mean, I mentioned the standing reach earlier. Like his tools are just better than guys like Kessler and Zubac. If Kessler was like 2 inches longer for standing reach, like his defense would be better. There would be more balls that he could get to. Mm-hmm. So it's like there's not a lot of like circumstances where I see him being less than like a good defender. I mean, he may not. You to your point, you did say like in between. Rudy Gobert,
that's what I mean.
Defender.
I think we agree. Like I'll be surprised if he's not a good defender. I really will be.
His rim protection is just so good. I mean, his instincts and feel for where the ball is, the number of balls that he can get to that other guys just can't. I mean, just the number of pin blocks that he has is crazy. Like he has actually pinning it against the backboard. You just don't see that as often. And he has a ton of those. So it's really like, it's tough for me. Like, I think like to your point, he just can't play as many minutes. So like the amount of defense that you're able to actually field for a 48-minute game is just like less than you would like. But it's really, really hard for me to see him being less than like a very, very good rim protector. I think the projection is very confident.
Yeah, not to make it all about Rudy, but one of Rudy's freak things in a good way is that he can play.
Yes.
A lot of minutes. Like, and that's not something that a lot of guys that size can do. And he's even bigger than Rudy, I think. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind, because that is one of the, I would say, almost consensus, not necessarily knocks, just skepticism about Clingan. Just like, can he play 30, even 33 minutes a game, 32 minutes a game. Because like that's all you need. Nobody's going to ask him to play 37 minutes a game. Like that'd be crazy.
Right.
But
And that's
maybe in the playoffs.
That's what I think really is like the answer to your question. It's like maybe he can only play 25 minutes versus like 31 minutes or something like that.
And that matters at this level. I mean, and also not to say like, okay, I don't think this, but I had someone say this to me that I think is smart offline. And they were basically like, I don't think you can take Donovan Clingan number one unless you just literally think he's going to be Rudy Gobert, like that level. And I don't necessarily buy that. I think that if you think it's like a possibility, you can still take in this class is the big caveat there. Like I think in a normal draft where you have a guy who might be in, a tier one prospect, which I think there are none of those guys in this class personally. I think in that kind of class, you'd have to believe that Donovan Clingan is a future defensive player of the year to take him number one overall. In this class, I don't think you have to believe that. I think they would be helpful, but I think you might the combination of maybe not believing all the way in on someone like Sarr or someone like Risacher, and believing that like Clingan really is going to be like a foundational defensive player for you, that might be enough. And I'm not saying that by the way, just he's not a 0 on offense. Like that should be. I think
he's a good offensive player.
Yeah.
Like he's not, an elite scorer or elite shooter, but like he brings a lot of value to offense just based on his finishing, his screening, and his passing.
Yeah, no, and I never want to paint the picture of otherwise because I think I maybe haven't just talked about it enough. I know our mutual friend Tyler Jones has been on this corner a lot. Like Clingan's offensive numbers at the college level were excellent. Like excellent. And part of that, maybe if you want to be a skeptic, is like UConn had a great system and great coaching, and that is worthy of interrogation because like that did happen. But like Kevin Pelton has him number one on his stats model for a reason. Like and that's not just defense. His offensive numbers are really, really, really good at the college level. It is college, but that's not like anything that hasn't been seen before. So we can move on from Clingan. I just think that he's interesting to kind of dive into, and I wanted to spend a little more time with him because I think you led with like you have number one. It seems like right now. Like so, I'll just ask this question to make it clear. Draft is today as we're recording this podcast. You take Clingan if you're the Hawks?
Yeah, I would. I mean, he's just the one that I ultimately come down to as that's the guy that I'm the most comfortable with. Like the way I'm looking at it is if my job is on the line, like who would I want to take there? And ultimately it would be him as long as the medicals are good. I just think like his cumulative profile, like when you look at the stats, when you look at the improvement from 1 to 2 on a team that won back-to-back titles as their best player, when you look at his projection as the best rim protector in this draft, somebody that can anchor your defense, somebody that has the ability to raise the floor in your defense significantly. When you look at some of the, the fruit that he has to pick, like getting in better shape, playing with more physicality that can make him more of a weapon in the post and unlock a little bit more offensive upside there. I just think there's a great, collective profile that makes him like the easiest bet in this draft, like the least likely to fail, like barring injuries. And you really can't fail at this pick too. Like it's an important thing when you don't pick next year, when you don't pick in 27, when you can't tank in 26, like you really need to hit on this pick. So I think getting somebody that can perhaps be a starter even for you out of the box is like a big deal. So I do lean him. I like Sarr a lot, and we'll just kind of use that as a pivot to him. Sarr has incredible tools. His ability, like his agility to defend in space, like that, I've tweeted some of it, but I mean, it is incredible what he can do sometimes on defense. I think that he's not always as engaged, like as it shows in highlights. Like there are times that he falls asleep on defense a little bit more than like an Evan Mobley when I remember evaluating him. But his ability to still recover, even when he's in bad positions and make a play, is just unbelievable. So I think that when you look at like the max, like, tippy top ceiling, like I think that Sarr probably does have the highest in this draft, but that doesn't necessarily mean I would take him. There's a lot of probabilities. How likely do you think it is that he reaches this? But defensively, I mean, his projection is really strong. When you look at like what he defended at the rim, I believe it was like in the low 40s. So he was excellent at defending at the rim. He also doesn't foul a lot. That's something too that you generally don't see that a lot from like young rim protectors. Like Jaren Jackson, like famously fouled a lot, at Michigan State. Yeah, it still does. Alex Sarr does not really do that. He already does a good job of like staying straight up when he contests. So he's already, I think, pretty mature on that end. Like being engaged all the time is something he needs to work on defensively. But other than that, like the tools are excellent. My concerns with Sarr are just on offense. Like I think despite the skill flashes, like there's some real concerns there. And I mean, the thing is like skill flashes are great. Like you want to see upside, like the ability to develop in ways that can make you like an offensive focal point. But there's a lot of guys that have had skill flashes and just not had that role in the NBA. Like go back and watch like Nick Claxton's highlights his last year at Georgia, like with him shooting threes, shooting off the dribble. I mean, Sarr looks more natural than Claxton did at Georgia, but he does not play that way in the NBA. James Wiseman had a lot of flashes, you know. Jonathan Isaac had
Jim
flashes.
Wiseman shot out on the podcast. We love that. No,
But
I'm with you, by the way.
but we're just focusing on like NBA projection here. Like he's not really like a true roll man. Like he didn't roll to the basket much at all. I believe only like 12 times, something around that per synergy. Most of the time he was popping, like when he ran pick and roll. He wasn't really looking to get to the rim too much. He's not a great like vertical athlete. I mean, he's better than Clingan in that regard, but he's not like an Evan Mobley, like shoot out of the gym kind of guy. There's not a lot of tape of him catching lobs for a number of reasons.
Honestly, one of the reasons, one thing I was going to say, and I probably will say it 10 times between now and the draft, I don't know if this is true, but it's kind of out there in the ether right now that Sarr doesn't really view himself as a center. Like he hasn't said that.
He does not.
But like he plays like a guy who doesn't view himself as a center. Does that make sense? Like if you watch the tape, the flashes are incredible. I think defensively it may not matter because I think if you're the biggest guy on the court, you just do what you got to do. But I do think that in general there is a little bit of a concern about that. Like, not maybe concern is the wrong way. It might actually work to his benefit if it like really comes together. But he doesn't do the big man stuff right now. He's not really doing that.
Right. He plays more like, in a nutshell, he plays more like a wing. Like if you look at like his synergy profile, you watch him on tape, like he's mostly spotting up. And his best offensive skill is basically if you can get him in an opportunity where he can attack downhill in space against a big, like he's always faster than these guys. He loves to get to a spin move. Like that's like his signature offensive move when he's on a drive. And he always finishes with his right hand. But what you want to do is you want to get him at a standstill or a transition where he has a lane to the basket to attack, but there's not a lot else. Like he's not a good shooter right now. He's not a good roll man. So like he's really not great at big man things, but he's not really good at wing things either. Every now and then he will flash a nice pass. He has kind of a cool turnaround jumper you'll see from time to time. So he can do some face up scoring. So that's something that his offensive game, I think, is you're looking to develop like the touch. Like you're looking to make him like a shooter, somebody that can stretch the ball out from three, but also somebody that can work a little bit from the high post. I think it's something that you're looking at from him. But he's not like, a Clint Capella type role man. Like he's going to be trickier to kind of integrate into an offense that's trying to win. And that's part of what I think is what favors Clingan over him. Is just Clingan's a lot easier to immediately integrate into an offense trying to win versus with Sarr, where you're going to want to let him experiment and kind of figure out his optimal role.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and much more. You can bet on all of that at FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel's America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, if you're a new customer, get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200. You can bet on everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park and more. Bet on all of your favorite players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and much more. The app is easy and secure. At FanDuel Sportsbook, they have everything you're looking for, runners to money lines, player props, future bets, game props, and much more. The app is safe and they cover the entire range of sports. That includes the NBA, WNBA, NFL, college football, baseball of both major league and college varieties, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and much more. And now is awesome time to sign with folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. The place to go is FanDuel.com/locked-on. One more time, just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It's a little bit more nuanced than this, but if they go with Sarr, which they might do still, I think Hawks fans would be happy if they did. It's going to be interesting to kind of see what the process is because I don't think that he's going to arrive as this ready-made product. I think he is much more of a long-term bet than someone like Clingan is, which makes sense. I mean, it's more of the toolsy, but there's this whole thing about like positions and stuff like that with regard to where he would play next to Jalen and if he's not playing center and all that stuff, but like. Even just forgetting all that, like I don't think Alex Sarr is going to be a very good NBA player like in October of this year. Like that's not a shot at him. I wouldn't draft that way anyway. I wouldn't worry about that's not what you're drafting for. But like he's not a plug and play player. Like you got to have a plan for him. You got to know what you're trying to get out of him development wise. Which isn't, it's not a pro or a con. It's just a factor that you have to keep in mind when evaluating someone like him, is that he's not like an in the box player that you just open up and you just use him in a certain way. Like he's going to take some molding roster wise, some molding to his game. And there's a big split around people that I trust that are smart, like about what he's going to end up being if it all works. And obviously if it all works, it's going to be really awesome no matter what, I feel like. But like, is that as a more traditional center, or is it more of like a, face up four who is this all world defender that does everything? That's all great. It's just trying to get to that point, and you're hoping that that's probably in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. And to your point too about like his role, like I don't see him as a center right now. I think, I've tweeted before, like his measurements are actually very similar to Tyson Chandler's coming out. So I do think he can eventually play center. And we do see that eventually where, fours move on to center, but he needs to get stronger, and he just doesn't do big man things well enough, I think, to operate as like a lone big right now. Like he needs to play next to another big right now to be like optimally effective if you're trying to win. If you're not trying to win, like that does change things a little bit because you can play him through mistakes. But on a team that's trying to win, then he's coming out in crunch time. He's not getting as many minutes. There's just a lot of different factors that come into play. And I have heard just through interviews that he does see himself as somebody that can do everything on offense. Like he sees himself having a big role. So that's something that you have to kind of bake in, to developing him is, he really wants to operate on the ball. So that's just, there's going to be growing pains, I think, with Sarr, regardless of who takes him.
Yeah, no, and I think almost more so, it's not about Atlanta being a worse situation for him, but because the Hawks want to win, like if you go to Washington and you're Alex Sarr, the canvas is pretty clear for you. Like, you can get, I'm not saying they're going to use him that way, but like you could get away with doing a lot more of that with him as a rookie than you could in Atlanta. Like, I don't think that anybody's got patience for that to be a primary source of what the Hawks are doing as a rookie. Like on a team trying to win, my line is always rookies are generally not very good. Put that aside, but like there's not going to be reps for him to be an on-ball player in Atlanta as a rookie. Like that's not going to exist. I mean, you got Trey, and right now you still have DeJounte, but even Jalen, like those guys are going to get those reps ahead of him. So doesn't matter, but there would be a lot of interesting discourse in October and November with how the Hawks were using or not using Alex Sarr. They drafted him. I'll say that right now.
Yeah,
it would be very interesting for sure.
Yeah, and I go back to like I'm a big fan of his overall. Like his defense just really pops.
Mm-hmm.
Like the comparison I always make is just like it's like a quarterback playing out of structure. When you talk about when the pocket breaks down, what kind of plays can you make? Like that's Alex Sarr. Like he can do a lot of different things when things break down. He's a super fluid athlete. He just has a lot to work on offensively and finding his optimal role. Like he might be someone, and some people I've talked to who are scouts think of him as like, ideally he's more of like your third, maybe even fourth option on offense. So he's more of a complementary type player while being, an engine on defense. But if he sees himself as being a top 2 guy, like, there's some possibilities for conflict there. So it's just creating the optimal context for him, I think is just going to be a little bit of a challenge for a team like Atlanta compared to the Wizards, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I think there are 2 paths to success for Alex Sarr. Like this is not even the third path of him not working out, but like there's he becomes a more on ball, like truly unlocked, crazy. I don't want to make the Giannis comparison, but like that kind of mold of a player.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's the more Evan Mobley path where like he is your third or fourth option on offense, but he gets a ton of value defensively and becomes an all-star level player doing that. Like those are both realistic outcomes, like that are possible. Obviously both would be great. It's just hard to figure out which one of those he actually might fall in. And then there's of course like the possibility that doesn't work, because otherwise if those were the only 2 options, he'd be the number 1 pick. There's a third option of him not working out that well on either side. I mean, I think honestly I have a hard time thinking that he'll be not good defensively. I think that there are levels to that, but I have a hard time seeing him fail, quote unquote, defensively. It's just that if his offensive game doesn't work,
I'm confident in his defense being good. I mean, I think like Claxton's kind of like a reasonable, median-ish outcome for him. Like he moves too well, and he's already advanced enough as a rim protector that it's hard for him, for me to not see him being good there.
Well, yeah, but as well as I do, if let's just say he becomes Nick Claxton exactly, a lot of people would be frustrated by that outcome and number 1 overall. I'm not even saying you should be, but you know how this is realistically. You get tagged as being the number 1 overall pick when you arrive. Some people expect you to be a star, right? So if you're quote unquote just Nick Claxton, who's a good player, is a starting level player in the NBA, that would be seen by a lot of people as a failure. I feel like whether that's correct or not, I'm not. You know what I mean? I'm like, whereas like Mobley, look, I'm sure you see it. I've already seen people say that if he only quote unquote became Mobley, that wouldn't be great. It's like, well, man, if that's your expectation,
if he's Mobley, then like he's a confident number one. If you
happy.
feel very strongly that he's going to be Evan Mobley, like very strongly, then you take him at one.
I agree. All right, that's enough on that. Anything you want to say about anybody else? We talk about Risacher if you want to. I know you're not like passionate about him, but if you want to make the case or make the case against, the floor is yours if you'd like to do that.
Yeah, I would have him third in that group. Like, Clingan, like I just like, collectively the whole profile. I like him the most. If his medicals just aren't great, or you have, a different kind of plan for where to take the team, then I would go Sarr. Risacher, like, I like his game a lot. He's a mature player. Like, that's one of the first things that jumps out when you watch him is like he plays like an NBA wing already as a teenager in France. And they played 60 plus games this year. Like, you just don't see many teenagers play that much. His shooting, that's something that I'm pretty bullish on overall. He might be more of like a 36, type shooter than more of like a 39 type shooter. And that's a very big difference. I think when you're looking at like an optimal case for him, he ends up being like along the lines of like a Trey Murphy type, like a good, upper 30s shooter on diverse actions, like somebody that can shoot off dribble a little bit, somebody that can shoot off screens, a great spot up guy, just a diverse shooter and a good finisher around the rim. He has good tools overall. I mean, he doesn't have a great wingspan, but he's close to 6'10" in shoes. He's just somebody that I see as somebody that could be very scalable. So if we go back to maybe a scenario where they trade DeAndre Hunter, he's just somebody that could fit in pretty well. He's a good on-ball defender. I watched the playoff games against Monaco in the French league, and he spent like an inordinate amount of time defending guards, especially in the first two games. Over the last couple, Mike James came back, who's like the best player in Europe, and he didn't defend him as much. But against guys like Elliot Kobo, I mean, his hips just really stand out. Like he can be very versatile in his assignments. So that's something that I like a lot about him. It's just hard for me to see like a path for him being like the best player in this draft. Like there's a lot of paths where he's like a top 3, top 5 player, somebody that's like very valuable that every team wants to have on their team, but not like a star. So I think that's kind of like what an optimal, ceiling outcome looks like for Risacher. But it's just hard for me to get behind him when I see like little path to being the best player in the draft.
Yeah, that's really the hard thing. Is I agree with you. I think that there are not many scenarios where he's the best player. And that doesn't mean you have to be. Like that's the misconception too about the number 1 overall pick. You don't have to be the best player in the draft. Like you got to be. There's a floor aspect. There's a medium aspect. There's a projectability aspect. There's obviously a range that you have to hit to be a quote unquote good pick there. But I tend to agree. I don't see a ton of star equity. Not that you have to have that, but that is one of the reasons I'm probably a little bit lower on him. I'm more in the camp of like, I'm sure you've seen this too. There are people that have him in that top 1 or 2. Gaboni's been high on him the whole cycle, but there are people that I trust that have him like 7 or 8. And it's like, I can see why, you know what I mean? That doesn't mean he's gonna be a bad player, that he's a bad prospect. But if you don't believe in the star equity, which I kind of don't, it's like hard to get me to number 1 or number 2 in this class, even if I do see a lot of the pathways to him being really good. Cause really good is really good, especially if you're a two-way forward.
He's an off-ball wing. Like he's just not really like an on-ball scorer. He hasn't really shown a lot of that. I mean, he can do like some cool step backs and shoot while tightly guarded. Like I think there is like real upside for him as a shooter. And I think in some ways like we kind of undervalue guys who are off-ball just because that role is so scalable. Like guys that don't dominate touches in your offense that are easy to get looks for.
Bogey's a great example. Like you and I both cape for Bogey's value, and it's 100% true. Bogey's still like really underrated, I think, for what he does for the Hawks. Like he's a very, very, very good player who is, he has some on-ball chops too, but like he's mostly an off-ball player. And that's, but again, not to relitigate the Trey Murphy thing again, but you and I both poke fun at this, but like there was a post that had the low end outcome for Risacher as Trey Murphy. And I was like, well, that would be the number 1 pick in the draft. Because that's not really. I mean,
Murphy's going to get over $100 million on his.
Trey Murphy's a very good player, and like that's no one's low end outcome in this draft. Like I'm sorry, that's not a real thing. I mean, even Clingan, who you seem to like quite a bit. I mean, the low end outcome for Donovan Clingan is not like a top 50 player in the league. Like maybe it is, and that's why you have number one. But I don't believe that. To be
No,
true.
I don't think you can project a top 50, median outcome for anybody.
No, I mean, if you could, this would be we'd be done here. Like, how many guys in my adult life have been a prospect where you could project a low end outcome of a top 50 player in the league? Like, it's not a very long list. LeBron.
I mean, Anthony Davis,
AD,
some of those
AD maybe,
elites,
yeah.
like the elite number one types. I think you kind of can. Like Zion, I would have, guessed like he's at least top 50, but
I mean,
definitely
I
not in this draft.
No, definitely not. Anyway, we're off the rails. Andrew, thank you for all the time. I've kept you at least 1 minute longer than I said I was going to. If you have anything else you want to say, please feel free to do that. If not, we can sign off here. But I appreciate the team building aspects. And by the way, just say this out loud. You and I can talk for 3 hours about this stuff very easily. I'm not going to make you do that, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. It's been fun. And I appreciate everybody too interacting on Twitter, giving me their own draft thoughts. It's been fun to discuss the Hawks again after like a rough season. So it's been fun.
It is a fun time. I do wish everybody was a little bit temperature down. Like, you know how this is. It's just what it is. Like, people are really dug in, and that's fine. I am not opposed to people having strong opinions. It mostly what I don't love is when we get to like, this player is the only option and everybody else sucks like that. I don't like that, but everybody else. But you're right. It has been way more entertaining, this break between the lottery and the draft, than it would have been last year. Now, granted, last year would have been just the WNBA-thon. That would have been fun in its own way. But I do appreciate the sort of diverse opinions. I had someone on the show before you this week that has Ron Holland number one, and it's like, I understand. I'm not saying I have Ron Holland number one, but I at least get it. Like, there are many guys in this class I could write a case for to be at the top, and that makes it kind of interesting, even if it's kind of also vexing for the team that has number one.
I've seen people that have Zach Edey at one. Like, I've seen Ron Holland at one.
I can't get there with Edey, but I understand that too.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of at one this year.
Yeah, we agree on that. All right. Well, Andrew, do you want to plug your Twitter? While I know it's on the screen for people watching on YouTube, but people listening on audio, you can
follow me at AndLankell. I appreciate it.
Check it out. Andrew's always talking about basketball and team building and things, and occasionally a watch or something he can.
Yeah.
And there you have it. All right. Well, as for everybody else, thank you again, Andrew. Please subscribe to the podcast, everyone. We will have more coming up later this week. We'll see you all next time.